Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Canada Soccer Files. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor. And today we are talking about Group B of Asian World Cup qualifying, looking at the 6 teams in the group. Those are Japan, Australia, Saudi Arabia, China, Oman, and Vietnam.
Right, and this is the final round of World Cup qualifying. Actually, a couple of games have been played, but that just adds a bit of interest to our overview. What we're going to do is in three parts here. So we'll begin with a kind of an overview of the group, and then part two will be a team by team overview. And that's going to be fairly superficial because we have 6 teams to get through. But the next time we go through Asia, we'll probably do like a team by team so we can go into more detail. And finally, we'll take a look at the prospects and our predictions for each group. I may have stolen some of your lines there, Connor.
That's all right. Let's jump into it.
No, I must introduce my shirt first. So this is the green of Saudi Arabia. Not that I'm a particular fan of Saudi Arabia. I do like them, but it's just that I like the color of their flag, actually. That's what it's all about.
And I'm in my South Korea shirt. So they're not in Group B, they're in Group A. But sticking with the Asian theme.
The bias extends over to this group.
It does.
Great. Okay, well, we're going to begin with a look at each country, kind of just where each country is and a little bit of information. And that's over to you, Connor.
Right, so starting with Japan. Japan has 126 million people. So it's the 6th most populous country in the Asian Football Confederation region. And its population, and the size of the country's 370,000 square kilometers, so 16th in the region. So not a particularly big country in size, but massive in terms of population.
Right. And next is Australia.
Australia, kind of the opposite of Japan. It's the 2nd largest country in the Asian region, though of course not part of Asia itself, and has 25 million people, which is 21st in the region, and out of 46 countries, that puts them kind of roughly in the middle of the pack in terms of population.
Wow, smaller than I thought in terms of relative terms. Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia, they have about 10 million people more than Australia, 34 million residents, which puts them 15th in the region. And they're also one of the largest countries in the region, too, at 2.1 million square kilometers. They're the 4th largest country in the region.
Wow. Okay, and China, we have some big countries here.
Yeah, China, the largest in terms of size, at 9.6 million square kilometers, and largest in terms of population at about 1.4 billion. So 1st in Asia and 1st in the world.
Wow. And Oman?
Yeah, next is Oman. They're located in the Persian Gulf, just off the Arabian Peninsula. Their population is 309,000 square kilometers. So it's actually not that far off the size of Japan, relatively speaking, 19th in the Asian region, but has a much smaller population at only 5.1 million residents. They're actually the smallest country in terms of population competing of the 12 teams in this final round.
All right, great. And we rounded off with Vietnam.
Yes, Vietnam, another similar sized country to Japan and Oman, but it has 97 million people, so a huge population. That's 8th in the Asian region.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we've thrown a lot of numbers out, so let's do kind of a quick comparison just of population.
Yeah, so China, the largest at 1.4 billion, kind of dwarfs any other country next to it. 10 times larger than Japan, which is 2nd at 126 million. That's about 100, then we go down to Vietnam at 97 million. After that is Saudi Arabia at 34 million people. Australia, fifth out of the 6 teams at 25 million people, and Oman, the smallest, at just over 5.
Okay, super. Great. Okay, well, let's get into the history of each country. So we're going to start with Japan, and we try to start with a nickname. Do we have a nickname for the Japanese team?
Yeah, there's a couple. One is Osim Japan, and the other one is the Blue Samurai. I'm probably more familiar with that latter nickname.
Yeah, me too. Okay, well, Japan is an odd team that kind of parallels the USA in several ways. Both the USA and Japan have a long history that's not widely recognized, but both were weak and fairly anonymous until the 1990s, at which time they both became a power in their respective regions and showed some form even on the World Cup stage. So Japan entered the 1938 World Cup but withdrew. They were banned for their role in World War II. In the 1950 World Cup, but they entered in 1954. They didn't enter in 58. They did enter in 62, and then they joined the Asian African boycott in 1966. So a bit on and off. But from 1970, they participated regularly in World Cup qualifications. In Asian Cup competition, it was similar, and it went on for much longer. They didn't enter the first 3, so their first entry was in 1968. Then they missed 3 of the next 4, entering in 76, and then returning in 1988, from which time they joined consistently. So their regional group is the EAFF, or the East Asian Football Federation, but that's something we're not going to get into in this podcast, maybe when we look at Japan individually. In terms of achievement, as I've mentioned, they were virtually a non-entity in world football until first successfully qualifying for the Asian Cup in 1988. It took until 1998 to successfully qualify for the World Cup, but then they did so every time since, and sometimes even passing the group stage, the round of 16 being their best finish. Their success in the Asian Cup predates that. After their first successful qualification in 1988, they won the title in 1992 and went on to win 4 of the 6 cups until 2011. That is their World Cup history, and we're going to take a closer look at their last one in 2018 to see if they passed the group stage there.
So in qualifying, Japan received a bye in round 1 of 3, as did all of these teams. In fact, that was really just for some of the weakest teams in the region. So they started in round 2. They began with a home tie against Singapore. However, they won all remaining games, including 2 big wins over Syria, who later reached the Asian playoff, actually, and Japan comfortably finished first. They started round 3 poorly, as they did in the previous round, losing to UAE at home, but they recovered there too, losing again only to Saudi Arabia in the final game, though they finished in first place above them. They otherwise only suffered away ties in Australia and Iraq. At the World Cup finals, they got off to a great start, beating Colombia, who gifted them an advantage with an early red card and penalty, which was converted. They tied Senegal in the second and followed kind of a peculiar strategy in their third game against Poland, seemingly leaving tense matters to fate by fielding a weakened team and playing poorly. Luck was with them, though, as they lost the game 1-0, but took second place in the group stage over Senegal, with whom they had an identical record, but Japan got through by having fewer yellow cards. So really just scraped in.
Yeah, that was an odd decision in the third game.
Yeah. They then participated in a thrilling round of 16 game against Belgium, which saw them go 2 goals up after halftime, and admirably continued to attack, which perhaps proved a mistake when on the last kick of the game, their offense-minded corner offered up a counterattack to Belgium, who swooped downfield and scored a winner, winning that game 3-2. So it was a bit of a quirky tournament for Japan, but the round of 16 is probably a good result.
Yeah, I think absolutely any of these Asian teams passing the group stage, they'd be pretty satisfied. All right, thanks, Connor. And we'll move on to Asian Cup history, which I've kind of overviewed. But yeah, Japan arrived, as I said, on the Asian scene as late as 1988. That first successful qualification saw them finish last in a group of 5 behind UAE and Qatar. A draw with Iran was their only point. So one would not have guessed after that they would win the next one, even if they were hosting, and they would go on to win 4 of the 6 editions until 2011. To sweeten that, South Korea, their biggest rival, has not won since the first and second editions in 1956 and 1960. So Japan and Korea are always happy to get one over on each other. 2015, though, was a step down, losing in the quarterfinals to UAE. And let's see how they fared in 2019.
So Japan qualified automatically for the Asian Cup, given that qualification was the same as the first 2 rounds of World Cup qualification. So despite reaching the final of that tournament of the 2019 Asian Cup, it was a performance that was only sometimes good. They struggled with Turkmenistan in their opener and should not have won over Oman, both getting an undue penalty and getting away with one that should have been given. So a bit of luck on their side. Their B team beat Uzbekistan, so they finished first in the group stage. They played a catenaccio or defensive style game against Saudi Arabia, who they beat, and they went on to beat Vietnam and then thump Iran. The latter really their only impressive performance. That semifinal win over Iran put them into the final against Qatar, where they lost 3-1. Qatar, kind of a surprising team, but well-deserving on the whole.
Yeah, Qatar was kind of unstoppable in that cup. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Japan's history, but now we're going to kind of take a more look at their recent qualifying for this 2022 World Cup in the previous rounds.
Right. So again, like all teams, they were not one of the bottom ranked 12 teams required to play in a preliminary round. All teams, that we're talking about today. They won all their games in round 2 of 3, which was kind of made easy by the lack of a really true pot 2 team or competitor. Tajikistan finished second in the group, but a full 11 points behind Japan. So it was kind of a stroll over the competition.
It really was. Kyrgyzstan was the nominal pot 2 team, but they're certainly not. If you look at the other pot 2 teams, they're not really at that level. So an easy qualification, but they were consistent.
Yeah, and now let's look at how they've started this final round. Their first game was a home game against Oman, and they lost 1-0. Oman perhaps getting a measure of revenge for that unlucky Asian Cup defeat. Japan usually very, very good at home, so that certainly was a surprise. And in their second match, they played away to China, but won that game 1-0.
Right. Okay, so they're currently sitting in 4th place, which I'm sure they won't be very happy about. But it's early days yet. Let's take a quick look at their scorers. Do you want to take this, Connor?
Sure. We'll look at a couple of their scores over recent tournaments. In the 2022 World Cup qualifying, so far, their leading goal scorers are Takumi Minamino, the Liverpool forward, and Yuya Osaka. Osaka has 24 goals for the national team and plays locally with Vissel Kobe in Japan. Couple other players that show up are a pair of defenders, Maya Yoshida and Yutu Nagatomo. Yoshida once of Southampton, and and Nagatomo. Another veteran like Yoshida with over 100 caps. He plays in Japan.
I'm surprised that Maya Yoshida is still there. I know he played in the 2019 Asian Cup, but all indications were it was looked like it was going to be his last tournament, and yet he's still playing with the team and has moved to Sampdoria in Italy. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, a little bit surprised. I mean, he's played at a high level. He's only 33 actually, despite all the caps. So yeah, maybe stick around. But there definitely are some veterans in the team. Another one is goalkeeper Eiji Kawashima. He's 38 now. He's their goalkeeper. And yeah, has been with the team, their number one, for a long time.
Right. Genki Haraguchi is there too. He's 30 years old, but they have lost a few players also.
Mm-hmm.
That's over to you, or do you want me to cover that? I'm just talking about Keisuke Honda and Shinji Kagawa, and Shinji Okazaki as well.
Yeah, a couple pretty well-known names that had pretty good careers in Europe. Shinji Kagawa playing with Manchester United for a brief spell. But they do have some young talent coming in as well. One player I'll mention in particular is Takafusa Kubo. He currently with Real Madrid. He's just 20 years old. He's been sent out on loan a couple places, but kind of one of their younger players to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, they did. They played in the 2019 Copa America, and to my surprise, kind of sent a B team to that. So it didn't really help them face the South American teams. They didn't do too badly, but obviously that was kind of to develop the talent. So they'll be hoping that that's paying off here, kind of a stronger bench.
Yeah. One other name to mention then would be Takahiro Tomiyasu. He's a young player, just 22 years of old, and recently signed for Arsenal.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Okay, well, that was a pretty good look at the players. We usually don't go into that much detail in an overview podcast like this, but let's take a look at where Japan stands in terms of their ranking.
So Japan was, along with Iran, one of the two pot one teams. So I think they are currently ranked second overall in Asia, according to FIFA rankings. Their current ranking is 24th in FIFA and 29th in ELO, which has been pretty consistent since the start of World Cup qualifying. So yeah, top 30 team in the world, which reflects their regional powerhouse status in Asia.
Right, so definitely kind of favorites to win this group. Well, we'll take a look at how they've done against other teams in this group in their head-to-heads. So firstly, we'll look at Japan. They have a winning record over Japan. It's 4 wins, 5 ties, and 3 losses. So a fairly even record there. But
over Australia, I should say.
Oh, what have I been saying?
Oh, just Japan. So yeah, Japan's record over Australia is what we're talking about.
Yeah, great, thank you. A fairly even record, but actually in their recent record, the last 10 years, they have 2 wins, 3 draws, and 0 losses. So getting the better of Australia recently. With Saudi Arabia, it is 7 wins, 1 draw, and 3 losses. They met Saudi Arabia in the 1992 Asian Cup final and in the 2000 Asian Cup final and won both times. They did lose a game to them in the 2018 World Cup qualifying, but otherwise have been fairly consistent over them. The recent record is 4 wins, 0 draws, and 1 loss. Surprisingly, they haven't played China that much. We just saw that they have played China in this qualification. But the last time they played them before that was in the 2004 Asian Cup final. That was a bit of an ill-tempered affair in China, which they won 3-1. and their overall record is 4 wins, 0 draws, and 2 losses. But they haven't played. They hadn't played since that 2004 Asian Cup final until they won in China very recently. Against Oman, it's pretty clear cut: 8 wins, 2 draws, and 0 losses. And we saw that they met in the Asian Cup and kind of got away with the win, but they didn't get away with it in recent qualifying, Oman getting the better of them in Japan. So that's the first win for Oman over Japan. And they haven't met Vietnam that much. It's 3 meetings, and they won them all, most recently in the 2019 Asian Cup quarterfinal, as we saw. So Japan has a better record than all 5 teams here. Okay, let's move on to Australia. And do we have a nickname for the Australian team? I wonder.
Yeah, probably one of the better known nicknames in football, I would say. The Socceroos.
That's right.
A great name.
Okay, well, I have to apologize in advance because this is supposed to be kind of superficial overview, but it's a bit difficult to do that with Australia because of their history. It's a bit complicated. So we'll dive right in with their tournament participation and major achievements. So they first entered the World Cup in 1966 and have participated in qualifying every time. Isolated geographically, FIFA had a challenge over how to include them and New Zealand and the several smaller island countries into World Cup qualifying. So it's a complex story. And actually, Australia's solution of joining the Asian Confederation was rejected twice in 1966 and 1972. This was presumably because it would make the Confederation too large. It's already very large, and adding Australia might open the door for New Zealand and all the way to Easter Island, stretching from the Middle East all the way halfway to South America. So that may have been a possible reason why AFC rejected their bid. That failed attempt led Australia to co-found the OFC, or the Oceania Football Confederation. However, a fair qualification process remained a problem and led to some really awkward solutions, Israel and Taiwan being kind of pseudo OFC members, for example. In the end, it became the OFC being awarded a half spot for the World Cup. But this became Australia dominating the OFC region and then losing to a more experienced and well-prepared country. Finally, in 2006, Australia got what they always wanted and became a member of the Asian Confederation, or the AFC. And from 2000 onward, they qualified for World Cups through the Asian Confederation. Woo! So in regional competition, they missed the first OFC competition in 1973 because they had briefly left in a bid to join the Asian Confederation. But when that was rejected, they rejoined the OFC and competed in that region from 1980 to 2004. Then from 2007 onward, they competed in the AFC, or the Asian Football Confederation. Well, there is a bit of history too to the smaller local confederations. They've kind of jumped around a bit there, but we'll leave that for a more detailed podcast. In terms of achievement, they reached only 1 World Cup from 1966 until 2002. That was in 1974. They've reached the World Cup, though, every time since 2006. However, 2006 was the only time they passed the group stage. So although they dominated the OFC, it wasn't actually as much as expected. In that regional competition between 1980 and 2004, they won 4 of the 6 titles, with New Zealand taking the other 2. And in in the AFC, they haven't dominated in Asia as much as feared. They did win the title in 2015, but that was when they hosted, and they fell short of winning in their other 3 entries. So there we go. So we'll take a slightly closer look at their World Cup record here. So as mentioned, they only reached 1 World Cup until 2002. In a nutshell, that kind of explains why they were dissatisfied with the qualification system for OFC. That single successful qualification was in 1974. Ironically, their last qualification through the Oceania Football Confederation in 2006 saw them finally win their half spot playoff for the first time, and it was over Uruguay, no less. And so they reached the World Cup in 2006, and they went on to their highest achievement there, a round of 16 finish. If you remember, Connor, they lost on Italy to a late penalty.
A controversial one at that.
Very much so. The AFC qualification process, though, has earned them regular entry into the World Cup finals, but they fell at the group stage in 2010 and 2014. So let's see how they fared in the most recent 2018 World Cup.
Yeah, we'll start with qualifying. They entered in round 2 and won all games except for losing away to second place Jordan, but they qualified for the third and final round quite comfortably. That, though, was an inconsistent campaign, which saw 4 draws in a row, including to Thailand, and only 1 win on the road overall. Despite besting Saudi Arabia, they were less consistent and finished in third behind them, with Japan winning the group. Interestingly, those 3 teams, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and Australia, all meet again in the same group here. This brought Australia to a tight playoff with Syria, which required an extra time winner after the 2 legs. And then they had an intercontinental playoff against Honduras, which actually proved easier. They again tied in the away leg before winning at home 3-1. Their manager retired after qualification, and they picked up Saudi Arabia's manager who had been fired after qualifying with the Middle Easterners. So kind of an interesting story. But in the Cup, they were competitive, but they were really unable to score, getting their 2 goals on penalties. They managed only a draw with Denmark, losing to both France and Peru, and finished last in the group stage.
All right, so that seems to be kind of their standard finish, group stage. Anything beyond that is a pretty good result. Very odd. We're going to talk about it a bit later when we get to Saudi Arabia, but very odd that they fired their manager after finishing second in the group ahead of Australia. Anyway, we will move on to their regional, a bit of a closer look at their regional history. So we've mentioned that they won 4 out of 6 tournaments that they entered in the OFC. The only real competition there is in New Zealand, though interestingly, Tahiti won that title after Australia left. Fears about Australia dominating the Asian region were allayed when they were knocked out in the quarterfinals of the 2007 Asian Cup by Japan. It became clear that they were a strong member in Asia, but not dominant. They did come second, though, in 2011, and then they won the title in 2015 as host, which actually prompted talk in the Middle East of expelling them from the AFC. But they weren't expelled. But let's see if they were able to keep it up in the 2019 Asian Cup.
So in 2019, they qualified through their World Cup qualification route. In the tournament, they lost their opener to Jordan, but a comfortable win over Palestine followed. And then they had a narrow win over Syria in their final game, which saw them through in second place. They required penalties to beat Uzbekistan after a 0-0 draw in the round of 16, before falling 1-0 to the United Arab Emirates at the quarterfinal stage. So quite an underwhelming tournament for Australia, and one that they entered as the defending champions.
Yeah, that's right, and definitely you can see they're not dominating the Asian region as much as some of the member countries worried. Let's move on to the 2022 World Cup qualifying, though, and see if they've been continuing to struggle.
That hasn't been the case so far. They won all 8 games in a very consistent round 2 performance, which is the round they entered at, beating both Kuwait and Jordan twice, as well as lesser teams Nepal and Chinese Taipei or Taiwan.
Yeah, we've seen that they have struggled with Jordan in the past, so that was a good show of consistency. And Kuwait was the pot 4 team here. That was supposed to be the result of a punishment, but it ended up being a kind of a punishment to all the lesser teams in the group. But again, good to show consistency in their wins over Kuwait. How have they been doing so far in round 3?
Well, that consistency has carried over. They played 2 games and won first a 3-0 victory over China in Australia, and they follow that up with a 1-0 away win in Vietnam. So that has them 2 games played, 2 wins, 6 points, and no goals conceded.
Right, so a pretty consistent performance so far, but they haven't really met any of the big teams yet. Let's take a look at some of their scorers. Do you want to lead this, Connor?
Yeah, we'll start with some of the more recent names.
Okay.
Harry Suter, he had 6 goals for them in qualifying so far. Jamie Mclaren is another with 5. Matthew Leckie, he's been around for a
Hang
little
on,
while.
I just have to jump in on Harry Suter because he's a central defender for Stoke in England. And he's a central defender with 7 or 6 goals in his first 7 games. What do you make of that?
That is extremely impressive. I actually hadn't realized he was a center back and would not have anticipated that. But yeah, good for him.
Yeah,
So yeah,
sorry.
Jamie. No, I'm glad you mentioned that. Jamie Mclaren is a name I mentioned. He plays with Melbourne City in Australia. Matthew Leckie is his club teammate. He's chipped in with 4 goals so far as well. Another name fans might know is Aaron Moy, who played for Huddersfield in the English Premier League when they were there. Jackson Irvine is another one who plays in the UK in the Championship, or did, sorry, with Hull City. He had a couple of years there. Do you want to talk about some of the names that no longer part of the team?
Yeah, just to Jamie Mclaren and Matthew Leckie did kind of try their luck in Europe, so they were with German teams for the most part. And Trent Sainsbury is one of their veterans now. He plays for Kortrijk in Belgium, not a really big team, but he was with PSG Eindhoven. Aaron Moy is in China now, so perhaps retiring. But some of the players they're losing here are Tim Cahill, probably one of their biggest names, and is it Mile or Mile Jedinak?
Yeah, or Mile Jedinak, not quite sure, but yeah, long-time Crystal Palace player and captain of the Australian team too.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's famous for scoring penalties for Crystal Palace, and in 2018 World Cup qualification, 7 of his 10 goals were on penalties. Tom Rogic is kind of on his way out. He's 29 years old, and he's only played 3 of their last 5 games. So these were all big scorers in the 2018 World Cup, but haven't really been around since. Tommy Juric, also 30 years old, and he quit the national team in 2018. I don't mean quit. That was just his last game for them. So a lot of those scorers in 2018 World Cup qualification are out, and there's no really outstanding players now. Like, of course, they're not going to rely on a central defender to get all of their goals. But certainly no players like Tim Cahill anymore, is there?
No, or Mark Schwartz, or kind of, Premier League stalwarts, or even big players on kind of some of the other top teams in Europe, some of the other leagues. So yeah, probably some of their biggest names that people would recognize are, like you said, no longer on the team.
Yeah, I mean, having said that, probably their biggest name right now is Matty Ryan, who's he was with Brighton. Now he's actually gone to Real Sociedad in Spain. But yeah, in terms of what you just said, he's probably the only player kind of at that level of Mark Schwarzer and Tim Cahill. You know Matt Ryan, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay, well, let's move on to the rankings.
So Australia were the pot 2 team in this group. They're currently 35th in FIFA and 36th in ELO. They've risen a bit in both systems. They were 43rd and 49th at the start of World Cup qualification. So they've risen about kind of 10 spots in both, and kind of at a bit of a high point, kind of in their recent history in terms of their rankings.
Yeah. I guess Kuwait and Jordan are fairly good teams, fairly decent teams in this region. So consistent wins over those raise their points, probably a bit more than deserved, but we'll see. Okay, well, let's move on to the head-to-head. We've already seen that they have a close record with Japan. 3 wins, 5 draws, 4 losses, but Japan has a better recent history. So we'll move on to Saudi Arabia. They have a record of 3 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. And in recent times, they've met in the 2014 and 18 World Cup qualifications, where they won 3 of those and tied in Saudi Arabia in 2018. Interestingly, they have an even record with China, but that's largely because they have only met 3 times. So they were bested in 2010 World Cup qualification by China, but then they beat them in the quarterfinal of the 2015 Asian Cup, which took place in Australia. So 1-1-1 there. Against Oman, they also have a winning record of 4 wins, 3 draws, and 1 loss. So the interesting part there is 3 draws. They tied twice in 2014 World Cup qualification, but Australia beat them 4-0 in the 2015 Asian Cup. And finally, Vietnam, they actually have never played in official competition against Vietnam. So it's 0-0 and 0. All right, are we ready to move on to Saudi Arabia?
For sure.
Okay, I am wearing their colors, kind of the same color.
And that leads into their nickname, the Green Falcons.
Okay.
Also known as the Sons of the Desert.
I think I've heard both of those being used.
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll start by looking at their general participation and major achievements. So they're actually latecomers to world soccer, participating only from 1978 in the World Cup, but they did enter regularly after that. They were not a member of the AFC for the Asian Cups from 1956 to 72, but they qualified for the 1976 version, coming second of 4 in a group behind Iraq. But then they withdrew from that tournament along with Thailand and North Korea. I couldn't find out the reason why a bunch of teams withdrew. It was perhaps because the tournament was hosted by Iran. They also withdrew in 1980 along with several other countries again, and then they re-entered from the 1984 Asian Cup competition and participated consistently from then. Their local zone is the West Asian Football Federation, the WAF. They're also members of the Arab nations and the Arab Gulf nations, and these are all competitions that we'll talk about in more detail in a future podcast. One interesting detail, though, they are originators of the Confederation Cup. another interesting thing we'll get into in a future podcast. In terms of achievement, it's probably best to begin with the Asian Cup here. They were dominant in Asia from their first completed entry in 1984. They won 3 of the first 4 cups, and they were in the final for 6 of the first 7 cups until 2000. However, that strength was not reflected in World Cup play until 1994, when they qualified for their first World Cup and reached a round of 16. And that was the only time they passed the group stage. Okay, and I guess it's still with me for a closer look at the World Cup history. So they appeared a weak team in World Cup qualification until 1994, when their strong Asian Cup form caught up. They went through the qualification undefeated, and then in the Cup, they won 2 games in the group stage over Morocco and Belgium, and they reached the top 16, where they lost to a well-performing Sweden. They reached the World Cup the next 3 times after that, but didn't pass the group stage in those cases. In fact, they never won another game, but they mustered only 2 draws in their 9 games. And then in 2010, they didn't qualify, and 2014 was even worse, where they failed to reach the final round, bringing their once dominant reputation as giants in Asia into serious question. They recovered in 2018, but I'm going to leave that. To Connor.
Sure, I'll pick it up from here. So in qualifying, we kind of alluded to it earlier. They got through round 2, suffering only away draws in Palestine and UAE. And then in the final round, they met both Australia and Japan, who they meet here. Despite being bested by Australia in that final round, they finished in second place ahead of them and so qualified for the World Cup directly. They also exchanged home wins with group winners Japan, and their only other drop point was an away loss to the UAE. As we mentioned, they fired their manager, but between the end of the qualification and before the tournament started. I believe it was Bert van Marwijk. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, he's definitely been around Asia.
Yeah. They went into the tournament as the second lowest ranked team, and hope sank further when they were thrashed 5-0 by host Russia, who were the only lower ranked team than them. However, Saudi Arabia had a respectable 1-0 loss to Uruguay, and that was followed by a comeback win over Egypt, scoring a late winner in that game. So they finished third in the group and were able to end the tournament on a positive note.
Right. Great. Yes. I was pointing out that it was odd that they fired their manager because 2014 was such a ghastly year for them. They didn't even make the final round. So they should have been happy with second place in the group, but obviously some friction with the manager there. I don't know if you have time, but I'm not dead sure about that Bert van Marwijk. If you have time to check it.
Yes.
But anyway, I'm going to move on with the Asian Cup here. So maybe if you're able to check while I'm doing that, would be great. But for Asian Cup history, they became the top Asian team immediately in Asian Cup competition after first entering in 1984. They won their first 2 entries and came first or second until 2007, except for a ghastly year in 2004. But that seemed to be an anomaly after they returned to form in 2006, going through World Cup qualification undefeated, and 2007 when they took second place in the Asian Cup, which qualified them automatically for the next Cup. However, their terrible form in 2004 returned in 2010 and saw them lose all group stage games in the 2011 Asian Cup. And it lasted long enough that it began to define them. We saw it lasted till 2014 in World Cup qualification. A good qualification run in 2015 might have heralded a return to form had they not been knocked out in the group stage of the tournament by second-tier teams Japan second-tier teams China and Uzbekistan. So their return to form had to wait until the 2018 World Cup qualification run. And that also earned them entry into the 2019 Asian Cup and an opportunity to reassert their regional strength. Well, let's see if they managed to do that in 2019.
So yeah, you touched on their qualification already. That was through the World Cup process, in the tournament itself, they kind of proved no match for the best teams in the region. They've kind of fallen behind the elite teams like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and Iran. And they were unlucky to meet two of those, the two finalists during their run in the 2019 Asian Cup. So to go through their games, they started well, beating North Korea and then Lebanon, though those proved two of the weakest teams in the tournament. Eventual champions Qatar beat them in the third game, leaving them second in the group, and that set them up with a very tough round of 16 opponent in Japan, to whom they lost.
Right, so definitely trying to get back to being a regional power, but I wouldn't say they're a top-tier team at this point.
Yeah,
How about you?
I wouldn't say so either. I mean, it was a good performance to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. And actually, they've been anonymous kind of for the last few years. I was surprised to realize or to see that they qualified for as many World Cups as they did in the 1990s and early 2000s, 4 in a row. Because they have been absent for a little while.
Yeah, well, I'm sure the Saudis will be anxious to kind of get back to the top of the among those top teams. But let's see. Being in the final round here, well, that's pretty much expected for them. But let's see if they're looking like a top team here in the 2022 World Cup qualifying in the previous round.
Yeah, so in the previous round, they started the campaign with 2 away draws in Yemen, who were playing in Bahrain at the time, and Palestine. But they won all their other games to finish first in the group, 5 points clear of second place Uzbekistan, who did not advance.
Those were fairly easy teams, but Uzbekistan was quite poor. They're often a final round team.
They won all their games at home without conceding, so pretty comfortable.
Yeah. Good consistency. How have they done in the first 2 games of this final round?
They've got off to a good start. They beat Vietnam 3-1 at home, and then won 1-0 away in Oman, an Oman team who, of course, beat Japan in their first game. So that was a good result. They've yet to play either Japan or Australia, so those are the games that are likely to define their qualification.
That's right. Okay, well, we'll take a quick look at some of their scorers and maybe apologize in advance for mispronouncing names here, but we'll try our best. Do you want to lead this, Connor, or would you like me to?
I'll let you take it away.
Okay. Their big scorer in 2018 World Cup qualifying was Mohammed Al Salawi, with 15 goals and 4 of them on penalties. I believe he was the highest scorer in Asian competition, perhaps even world competition. I'm not sure. But they also had some big scorers in Taseer Al Jassem and Yahya Al Sheri and Nawaf Al Abed. However, all of those guys. Sorry, I'm not sure about Al Abed, but all of those guys are retired now, as is well-known defender Osama Hassawi. So they've lost a lot of players since that 2018 World Cup, and they would be kind of in a rebuilding phase. But even even some of the up-and-coming players were around there. So Salman Al-Faraj and Salem Al-Dosari haven't. Yeah, Faraj is the captain of the team now, and he's actually a central midfielder, so not a big scorer with 62 caps. Salam Al-Dosari has 58 caps and 16 goals, and we can see he's the top scorer in World Cup qualifying. Sorry, in 2022 World Cup qualifying. So a couple of other names who are kind of scoring in their recent World Cup qualification are Salah Al Sheri, and he has 9 caps in 6 goals. The strange thing about him, though, is he's 28 years old and got his first cap in 2020, but he's certainly made the most of it, scoring 6 goals in 9 caps. Another scorer is Fahad Al-Mualad, and he's a veteran with 64 caps and has 17 goals. So that's where their goals have been coming from in this qualification. Anything to add there, Connor?
Yeah, all Saudi players on their team currently play in their domestic league, which I think is quite common. It might have even been the case for the 2018 World Cup. They don't have a lot of players playing outside their country. And a lot of players kind of grouped into a couple of their big clubs: Al Ittihad, Al Ali, Al Nassr, Al Hilal. And to go back to the manager, it was Bert van Marwijk who led them through a World Cup qualification, but was sacked or left before the tournament started. And their current manager is Hervé Renard.
Oh, really? Oh, the handsome Hervé Renard.
Yeah, a very successful coach in Africa with a number of teams. I think he was a Morocco manager at the last World Cup, but he's
He's the guy who brought Zambia to the African Cup final.
Yeah, he's well sought after in Africa, and I'm not sure if he's coached in Asia before. This may be his first team, but yeah, definitely a big name in world football for sure.
So are you saying that Bert van Marwijk went to from Saudi to Australia?
That's correct.
But isn't he the UAE coach now?
He is now, yeah, just a short period with Australia.
Wow, he's sure been making the rounds, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of these guys do play in Saudi Arabia. Al-Mualad was actually loaned to Levante in Spain, but just a year, and then he came back. And more impressively, Al-Dosari was loaned to Villarreal in Spain. But again, it was just for a short term, and then they seemed to come back and play in Saudi Arabia, or sometimes in other Middle Eastern countries like Qatar. All right, well, that was interesting. Let's look at their rankings here.
They were the pot 3 team in this group. They're currently ranked 61st in FIFA and 59th in ELO. They've risen quite a bit. They were 69th in FIFA and 85th in ELO at the start of World Cup qualifying. So maybe coming out of a bit of a weak period and following that up with a run of good results has seen them rise quite a bit. So yeah, right around that 60th mark.
Yeah, that's a big rise, but it's from a fairly low position. 85th, they wouldn't be happy. That's one of their lowest positions in a long time. Anyway, let's move on to the head-to-head. So we've already looked at them against Japan and see that they have a losing record there. And against Australia, though they haven't played much, a slightly losing record there. And we'll go directly to China here. So against China, it's very tight. They have 4 wins, 3 draws, and 5 losses. And in the last 10 years, it's 1-1-1. So they met in the 1984 Asian Cup final, which Saudi Arabia won. And their most recent meeting was in the 2015 Asian Cup, where they lost to China. So pretty tight there with China. With Oman, it's also quite tight, but surprisingly, they haven't met that much, despite being very close to each other regionally. They met in the 2014 World Cup qualifying, where they tied each other twice. So the record overall is 1 win, two draws, and 0 losses. And finally, against Vietnam, their record is 2 wins, 0 draws, 0 losses. They've only met in 2002 World Cup qualifying, and for some reason they played both games in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia hammered them both times. But really no history there because they haven't met for so long. Okay, that is the end of Saudi Arabia. And the next team we move on to is China. Do we have a nickname for China?
I kind of had to dig a little bit for this. I did come up with Dragon's team, but I'm not sure how widely used that is.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard it used, but there we go. Okay, well, let's take a look at tournament participation and major achievements. So they first entered the World Cup in 1958 and experienced some of the tough luck that would become their theme. Whether because of that or for other reasons, they did not enter again until 1982, from which time they participated consistently. The Asian Cup, though, began in 1956. However, they didn't enter again until 1976. The 1976 Asian Cup then was the time from which they became consistent in both competitions. And again, a regional group is along with China, along with Japan, Korea, and 7 other countries, the East Asian Football Confederation. East Asian Football Federation. And it's something we'll delve into in a future podcast. In terms of achievement, for a country their size and their status in the region, and even their success in other sports, China has done poorly in football. They've reached a World Cup only once in 2002, and beyond that, they've struggled to reach the final round of qualification. Although 1982, they did come close to the cup. In the Asian Cup competition, they've done a bit better, coming second twice in 1984 and in 2004. They hosted that 2004 competition. However, since that time, the quarterfinals is their best finish. But they have done a little bit better in their local group, but again, we'll leave that to a future podcast. So we're going to take a bit of a closer look at World Cup qualifying. They reached the Cup only once in 2002, and actually they got there by dint of the Cup being in Asia. That was when South Korea and Japan co-hosted, so they weren't part of the qualification process, making it a bit easier. China nevertheless had a good qualification and finished far ahead of UAE and Uzbekistan to qualify. Arguably, though, it wasn't worth it, as once they reached the Cup, they lost to Costa Rica, Brazil, and Turkey and exited without scoring a goal. They had come very close to qualifying in 1982, where they lost the final playoff to New Zealand, and in 1998, where they were just 1 point shy of an advancing spot. The next 3 editions saw them fail to reach the final round of qualification. 2014 was a typical performance, finishing 3rd behind Iraq and Jordan in the semi-final round. In 2018, though, well, we'll take a closer look at that, led by Connor.
So they entered, as all these teams did, in round 2. They came second in the group behind Qatar, even though Qatar is host, because World Cup qualifying is also Asian Cup qualification. Qatar were a participant. So they came second behind Qatar, with whom they exchanged home wins. That was their only loss, but they were troubled by Hong Kong, who tied them twice and finished 3rd. So kind of a bit contentious, just kind of going on with some of the political events there.
It was, and they kind of embarrassed themselves a little bit by calling Hong Kong an unworthy opponent. I think maybe at the beginning of the qualification.
Yeah, interesting. Well, like we said, they tied both those games, both times 0-0. They did have enough points to advance to the final round. There, they were bested by Iran and Syria and exchanged home wins with South Korea and Uzbekistan. However, they finished in fifth place behind all of them, only ahead of Qatar, who they bested this time around. Their record there was 3 wins, 3 draws, and 4 losses.
Right. So it's not like reaching the final round is an achievement for them, but they do tend to struggle when they get there. Let's move on to Asian Cup history and see how they've done there. A bit of a closer look. So they've actually fared a little better in the Asian Cup, which they've reached every time since their first qualification in 1976. They did well in the early years, finishing in the top 4, 4 out of the first 5 times, and finishing second in 1984, which, along with their good World Cup performance in 1982, made it a good period for them. Their good form continued beyond a quarter-final finish in 1996 to a 4th place finish in 2000 and a 2nd place finish in 2004 when they hosted. There, after going undefeated through the whole tournament and beating Iran on penalties in the semi-final, they lost 3-1 to Japan in the final, leading to bitter complaints about the refereeing, and in fact they refused to accept their 2nd place medals. They were knocked out at the group stage in the following 2 cups, and they barely qualified for the cup in 2015, squeaking in only as the 3rd place finisher in their qualifying group. They did well once there, though, winning all group stage games, but then unluckily meeting host and eventual winner Australia in the quarterfinal. Let's see how they did in 2019 in closer detail.
They started off the tournament beating Kyrgyzstan, though only because of 2 mistakes by the keeper. But they looked more convincing in their win over a weak Philippines team, winning that game 3-0. And then they lost to group winners South Korea to finish 2nd. In the round of 16, they beat Thailand to earn a quarterfinal matchup with Iran, but again proved no match for that first-tier team, losing 3-0. So it was kind of a very second-tier performance all the way through the tournament, losing to the superior teams and beating the teams they should be beating.
Yeah, that's right, and we'll see when we get to the head-to-head. I mean, they are fairly consistent over weaker teams, but they're not matching the first-tier teams. Okay, let's go to World Cup qualifying for this Cup 2022 and see how they did in the previous round.
Yeah, so in round 2, they exchanged home wins with Syria, though Syria played their home games in the UAE. But a draw in Philippines was enough to condemn them to 2nd place, so 2 points behind Syria. They nevertheless advanced to the final round as one of the top 5 2nd place finishers, and that's where they find themselves now.
Right, and how have they been doing in the final round?
It's been a rough start for them. They've had tricky games away to Australia and then playing at home to Japan. But they've lost them both, 3-0 and 1-0 respectively.
That's right. Well, those are probably 2 of the toughest games they'll get. So it's Vietnam next, so they'll probably have a better chance. Vietnam at home. Let's look at some of the players, especially the scorers. And shall I do that, or do you want to take it?
I'll let you start it off.
Okay. Well, the veteran player, Zheng Ji, and again, I should apologize for my pronunciation here, but he's still listed as the captain of the team, but he hasn't played since 2019, so I'm not really sure I'm not really sure where he is at. The top scorer in 2018 World Cup qualification was Yang Zhu, but he has since retired. 60 caps with 33 goals was a pretty impressive record. However, the second top scorer, Yu Dabao, is still around, even though he's 33 years old. I think I'd better hand it over to you, but I think you're familiar with some of the new players, including Wu Lei.
Yeah, Wu Lei, probably the biggest name on the national team. Kind of the only one who really plays outside of China. He plays with Espanyol in Spain and has since 2019. He has 76 caps and 25 goals in that period. Another player is Yang Zhu. He has 33 goals and 60 caps, so a pretty good return. And then I did want to mention two players with the team, Allen and Elkison. Both are Brazilian-born players who play for China. They're the first foreigners to play for the national team, and it was quite controversial for China to allow foreigners to play for the team. It kind of got a bit of a backlash, but perhaps part of kind of the global world we live in now, and kind of trying to help improve them and make them into a team that can be competitive in World Cup qualifying.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of teams that didn't have foreign players before take them on, and I think a lot of that is not necessarily the players being born and raised in the country, although that is coming, but players who have played in the country for long enough that they can qualify as naturalized citizen. But I think Elkison is in his 30s. Is he? Do you know?
Yeah, he is. Both are actually. They're both 32, I believe.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, did you cover Gao Lin, and shall we move on?
I didn't cover Gao Lin, but let's move on.
Okay, Gao Lin is retired anyway, so from international soccer at least. And sure, let's move on to rankings. Thanks for covering that, Connor.
Yeah. So China currently ranked 71st by FIFA and 78th in ELO. This is a small rise from where they started World Cup qualifying, or where they started at the start of World Cup qualifying when they were 82nd and 87th. So yeah, kind of in the 70s is roughly where they've been for the last kind of three years or so.
Yeah, and apart from that tie with the Philippines, that was a fairly consistent performance. Okay, well, let's take a look at their head-to-head. We've already seen with Japan, it's a record of 2 wins, 0 draws, and 4 losses. And an even record with Australia, who they haven't played much. It's 1-1-1. And with China and Saudi Arabia, a very tight record, winning record with 5 wins, 3 draws, and 4 losses. I just want to point out one detail there. China is undefeated in all World Cup qualification games, and Saudi Arabia was undefeated in all Asian Cup competition games, at least until 2015, which smashed that pattern. Interesting, though, hey?
Yeah, very.
So that would give China the upper hand here if that pattern were to continue. Against Oman, they've only played twice, and that was in 2002. They won both legs. And also against Vietnam, they haven't really played much. But it's 5 wins, 0 draws, and 0 losses. The last time they met was in 2011 Asian Cup qualifying, where China actually won 6-1 at home. So Vietnam's probably a bit of a better team, though, now than they were then. And with that, we can move on to Oman. How about a nickname for Oman?
The nickname I could find is the Red, so not that original, but descriptive, I could say.
It is. They do wear red. Okay, let's look at their tournament participation and major achievements. Their first entry into the World Cup was in 1986, but they withdrew and first completed a qualification in 1990, but they've been consistent since then. They first entered and completed qualification in the Asian Cup a bit earlier in 1984, but then they didn't enter in 1988. But from 1992, they have participated consistently. They are also members of the local West Asian Football Confederation and also of the Arab nations and Arab Gulf nations, but we won't get into that here. In terms of achievement, they have never reached the World Cup. In fact, they've only reached the final round of qualifying 3 times in 2002, 2014, and now in 2022. Asian Cup play showed steady improvement from not qualifying before 2004, qualifying but getting knocked out at the group stage from 2004 to, I guess, 2011. No, until 2015, and then finally passing the group stage in 2019. I'm giving away your thunder, Connor.
Well, we'll come to that in a bit. We'll stay with their World Cup, or I can jump into their recent World Cup qualifying.
Oh, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
So Oman received a bye in round 1, entering in round 2. They won all their games at home except for a draw with Iran, who bested them and won the group. They were not so good on the road, though, losing to Turkmenistan and tying an improving but still lowly Guam. They did beat India twice, though, perhaps a reflection of India's weakness in the region. Despite finishing second in the group, they were not among the 4 best second-place finishers who advanced to the final round. So, they did not participate in round 3 at the last go.
Right. Okay, we got a bit mixed up there and forgot to do the closer look at the World Cup, but we'll just kind of gloss over that. In short, they were kind of weak at the beginning and then reached the final round in 2002 and 2014. But as you just showed, not in 2018. But we'll move on to their Asian Cup history here, and we will take a bit of a closer look at that. So they qualified for their first Asian Cup in 2004, having failed the previous 4 times since 1984. After 2004, they reached the Cup every time, except for 2011, where they fell short, despite a decent performance in the qualifying group. They were unfortunate not to pass the group stage in 2004, given that they tied Iran and beat Thailand. 2007 was weaker, though. There they lost to Thailand after a good start, tying Australia. A tie with Iraq in the 3rd game left them last in the group. After failing to qualify in 2011, they were in a tough group with South Korea and Australia. Who they lost to, and a win over Kuwait earned them only 3rd place in 2015. That's 3rd place in the group stage. And let's take a closer look at 2019 to see if they were able to get past the group stage.
Yeah, 2019, an expanded tournament, as you mentioned. So went from 16 to 24 teams, and in fact, 16 teams advanced out of the group stage. So, made it easier than the 8 that would typically advance prior to 2019. Their 2nd of 5 finish behind Iran but ahead of Turkmenistan actually saw them needing a further qualification round for the Asian Cup. But there they were placed in an easy group. They exchanged home wins with Palestine and finished first ahead of them, the Maldives and Bhutan, the other 2 teams in the group. In the tournament, they actually performed better than their results indicate. They were the better team against Uzbekistan, who they lost to, and equal to Japan, but lost to them as well. A win over Turkmenistan in the 3rd game saw them deservedly through as one of the advancing 3rd-place finishers. However, there they were matched with what seemed the strongest team in the tournament, Iran, who knocked them out in the round of 16.
That's right. Well, Qatar was probably the strongest team in the tournament, but to that point, Iran was, if that's what you meant.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, great. Let's move on to the 2022 World Cup qualifying, the previous rounds and the first couple of games of this round. How have they been doing, Connor?
They've done well so far. They lost both their games to Qatar in round 2, but won all their other games over India, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh to finish second in the group. That advanced them to the final round as one of the top 5 second-place finishers.
Right, and I'll just point out, because it may be a bit confusing, Qatar was playing actually not in World Cup qualification, but because this was qualification also for the 2023 Asian Cup, Qatar did take part in it. They've automatically qualified for the World Cup, though. So that's for that reason Qatar didn't, even though they won this group, they didn't pass to round 3 of 3, which is just for World Cup qualification. And how have they been doing in round 3?
Well, we mentioned both the results earlier. It was a very difficult start with a road game in Japan, but they won 1-0, a huge shock. They were unable to follow that up in their next game, a home game with Saudi Arabia. They lost by a score of 1-0, but 3 points from those 2 set of fixtures, I think, will be relatively pleasing for them.
Yeah, that's a competitive start for them.
Doesn't get easier. They play Australia next in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, not many easy games for them here. Let's take a look at some of the scorers. And the main scorer is Abdulaziz Al Mughbali. So he has featured in all of their recent competitions. So he didn't score in the 2019 Asian Cup, but he was in the 2018 World Cup qualification, and he got 6 goals in 2019 Asian Cup qualification. That was that 14-0 win that we saw over Bhutan. 6 of those goals were scored by him. So he's a veteran, 96 caps and 32 goals in those caps. And Ahmed Mubarak Al Mahajari, I'm butchering that name. Maybe I'll go by the nickname Kano. Is also has been one of their scorers. An amazing 185 caps for that player, Connor.
That is incredible.
Yeah, and 22 goals. So he's not a huge scorer. He's a central midfielder for them, but he's retired. He's retired now. And a couple of other names. Al Hajri is still around. He's still in his 20s. And Muhsin Al Ghathani seems to be an up-and-comer. He's only 24 years old, and he has 7 goals in 29 caps. So he could be scoring goals for them. But probably their most famous player, maybe you can introduce, Connor?
Yeah, that would be Ali Al-Habsi, who is the only Oman player to play in the Premier League. And he spent a lot of years in England with Bolton Wanderers, Reading, and Wigan Athletic. He was most recently with West Brom, but I don't think he made any appearances for them. And I believe now is unattached. But yeah, the vast majority of Oman's players play in the domestic league in Oman. He was one of the very few to kind of play internationally and have a European career.
Yeah, and he was a good goalie. I liked him.
Yeah, I liked him a lot.
Yeah, unattached or maybe retired because he is 40 years old. And he was injured for the 2019 Asian Cup. But he did play after that. He played last in November 2019. So a slim chance of maybe him playing for the team again, but 40 years old. Okay, and then maybe just one other player to mention, a kind of scoring some of their recent goals is Al Alawi Al Mandhar. Sorry, I've seen different versions of his name, so I'm a bit confused. On most sites, he's called Rabia Al Alawi. Anyway, he's got 15 caps and 5 goals, and he's 26 years old. He plays in Oman, as most of them do, and he's their top scorer in World Cup qualifying so far. All right, should we move on to rankings?
Right. Oman is 79th in FIFA and 80th in ELO. So very consistent between the two systems. That's roughly where they have been kind of for the last little while. They have spent time below 100 in the FIFA rankings. But yeah, kind of that 80th mark reflects kind of their recent performance is doing well in the Asian Cup and World Cup qualifying.
All right, great, thanks. Well, we'll take a look at their head-to-head. Well, we've seen it with our looks at the other teams. So just to refresh, they've never beaten Japan, except actually they did just a couple of weeks ago. But until then, it was 2 draws and 8 losses against Japan. So that kind of highlights how big an achievement it was. They've also beaten Australia with 1 win, 3 draws, and 4 losses. With Saudi Arabia and China, they really haven't played each other that much. And the same is true with Vietnam, where they played in 2004 Asian Cup qualifying. Oman won 6-0 in one of those legs. And that's the only time they've played. So it's 2 wins, 0 draws, and 0 losses. Okay, and that brings us to the end of Oman and on to our sixth and final team, Vietnam.
Right, known as the Golden Star Warriors, a reference to their flag, but a pretty cool nickname.
Yeah, a little more creative than the Reds. Okay, well, even though North Vietnam won the war in 1975, they didn't have any soccer history to speak of. Therefore, South Vietnam's record is considered the predecessor in this write-up. So Vietnam, they have a long history, if it is a bit interrupted. Their entry into the 1954 World Cup was not accepted for reasons that I can't find out. And they didn't enter again until 1974. They withdrew in 1978 and did not enter until 1994, from which time they participated unfailingly. Their entry into the Asian Cup was more consistent, beginning with the first one in 1956.
Wow.
Yes, and even during the Vietnam War, they were absent only in 1972, but they returned in 1976. However, they disappeared from the Asian soccer scene from 1980 until 1992, returning in 1996, and they participated consistently since. They're the only representative here from the AFF, the Asian Football Federation, except with the possible exception of Australia, which we'll get into in a future podcast. But that is their local group, together with teams like Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia, their local group. In terms of achievement, they've never reached a World Cup. In 2022, they reached the final round of qualifying here for the first time. They did well in the early days of the Asian Cup, finishing 4th in the first 2 editions. After a long absence and some failed qualification runs, they reached the Cup again in 2007 and in 2019, reaching the quarterfinals in both cases. And they've had some success in their region, but we won't get into that. We'll just move on to a closer look at the World Cup. So in World Cup, they have not made a mark. Their only successful entry in 1974 saw them beat rivals Thailand, who is generally stronger, But they lost their first step of qualification in a group with Japan and Hong Kong. Returning to the Cup in 1994, they were knocked out in the first round every time until 2014. These were usually group stages, and they earned points from only the weakest teams. Their strength in the 2007 Asian Cup only registered as an away draw with Lebanon in 2006 World Cup qualification. 2010 was a bit unfair, actually, as it consisted of a home and away playoff with the much stronger UAE. And 2004 was not much better, as they exited in round 2 of 4, losing a playoff with Qatar, though they did win the home leg. And let's take a look at how they did in 2018. But we can already see that the fact that they're here shows that this is a good year for them. How did they do in 2018?
They were not one of the 12 lowest ranked teams in the region, so they entered in round 2. They're apart from beating Chinese Taipei twice, which was kind of expected. Their only result was a draw with Iraq, finishing behind Thailand and Iraq in the group. They lost both to their local rivals, Thailand, while Indonesia was a 5th team but had been disqualified from the group. So they finished with just 2 wins, a draw, and 3 losses, and did not pass into the final round.
That's right. Okay. So you can see this is a really big achievement for them to be in this final round here. And let's take a bit of a closer look at their Asian Cup history. So their Asian Cup success looks much better on record, but a close examination yields kind of a few asterisks. 4th place in 1956 and 1960 speaks more to their long history than to their strength. They did well to beat Malaysia and Singapore, respectively, in qualification playoffs, but the tournaments were 4-team tournaments, so 4th place basically means they finished last. In fact, they only earned a single tie with Hong Kong over both tournaments. Qualification for the 2007 tournament was made easier by dint of being one of the 4 hosts, and qualification for the 2019 tournament was made easier by the fact that it had expanded to 24 teams. However, if the qualifications for the tournaments come with some asterisks, their performance legitimized them being there. They started 2007 with a win over UAE, and a tie with Qatar saw them through to the quarterfinals, where they lost to Iraq. And also in 2019, they performed quite well. Should we take a closer look, Connor?
Yeah, they didn't qualify directly through World Cup qualifying through round 2, but needed a 3rd round to qualify. In that 3rd round, which was a group stage, they went undefeated, but tied both games with Jordan, who finished ahead of them, and both games with Afghanistan, who finished behind them, advancing in the 2nd place after beating Cambodia twice.
Yeah, Afghanistan is getting a bit better.
Yeah, well, hopefully that's not interrupted by events there. It was a good finish for a young team with a lot of hope for the future. In the tournament itself, they stood little chance against Iran and Iraq, but were actually competitive with the latter. Beating Yemen saw them advancing as a 3rd place finisher. And there they beat Group B winners Jordan on penalties, and then reached the quarterfinals where they fell to Japan, losing 1-0 on a penalty kick. So very competitive after advancing beyond the group stage, but really in the tournament as a whole.
Yeah, I know Vietnamese are very excited about this young squad of players that are coming through. So we'll be taking a look at that, some of those players shortly. But let's see how they've done in 2022 World Cup qualifying. Obviously, they did well because they're here in the 3rd round.
Yeah, they've done quite well so far. They entered in the 2nd round. sorry, they entered in the second round, and they came in as the second seed in the group ahead of Thailand, a team which is traditionally stronger than them in the region. And it was kind of justified. Even though they tied Thailand twice, they otherwise dropped points only with a loss to the UAE and finished 1 point behind them because they were consistent with wins over Malaysia and Indonesia. That consistency saw them through as one of the top 5 second-place finishers to advance to the final round for the first time in their history.
Yeah, that was a terrible performance by Thailand. They'll be very disappointed. But a really good performance by Malaysia, which is one of those teams that did have to play in round 1 of 3, but they proved competitive in this group. But back to Vietnam, let's see how they've been performing so far in the first 2 games of round 3.
Well, it's going to be tough for them, and it started tough. They started with a 3-1 loss in Saudi Arabia, followed by a 1-0 home loss to Australia. But in fairness, the teams they'll be measuring themselves against are most likely to be China and Oman, and not necessarily Saudi Arabia, Australia, or Japan.
Yeah, that's right. And those are the next 2 teams they play, China and Oman, although both of them are away. Okay, and now the part that I've been fearing, which is pronouncing Vietnamese names. As I think I've butchered pretty much all the teams, except Australia. I did well with Australia.
Very well.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll take a look at their team here. Le Con Vin was their big scorer for a long, long time. An amazing 50 goals in 84 caps between 2004 and 2016. But now he's off the team. And in fact, he wasn't part of that 2019 Asian Cup squad either. But I think the biggest new name is Nguyen Quang Hai. He still plays in Vietnam. Anyway, he scored the goal of the tournament in the Asian Cup 2019, and they were calling him, kind of the great hope for Vietnamese football. And he really was kind of an impressive midfielder on the team. But he had some support to back him up there. Nguyen Con Thuong is also, I believe, no, maybe he's a forward. He was also impressive in the 2019 Asian Cup. Bit of an older name, Nguyen Van Thuan has quite a few of their goals. And then the captain, I dare not even pronounce his name, but is it K Noko Hey? Ouch! I'm sure all the Vietnamese are covering their ears as I say these names. Any thoughts on these? It's basically a fairly young squad there, Connor.
Yeah, just in general, in their Asian Cup match against Jordan, the average age of the team was just 21 years old. So a very young team. Their coach is actually a South Korean, former South Korean player, and he has a long career in management. So he was also managed Vietnam at the U23 level. So he's been able to draft in a lot of those younger players into the full national team. Yeah, he's done very well. Kind of transformed this team. He's got a lot of young players, and there is, I think, genuine excitement about the squad of players that they have.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I mean, they looked, they looked like a competitive team in the 2018 19 Asian Cup, and as you say, they were a very young team. So I was kind of hoping to see some of them maybe playing outside of Vietnam and getting a bit more experience. I think only one of them. I think only one of them has been outside. A guy was playing in Belgium, and he played for Incheon United in South Korea. That's Nguyen Con Thuong. it looks like Japan kind of tried him out, South Korea tried him out, Europe tried him out, but now he's back in Vietnam. So I'd really like to see some of these guys playing outside. Not that I'm criticizing Vietnam, but that experience would be really good for them. There is one more player to mention. Nguyen Ten Lin is a forward with 7 goals in 18 games. So it looks like they have some firepower there. But let's move on now to the rankings.
So they're currently 92nd in FIFA and 101st in ELO. They've actually not I believe since ELO rankings come out have they cracked the top 100. So they're actually extremely close to doing that now. And 92nd, kind of seen a slow, steady rise from Vietnam from kind of even the 130s just a few years ago. So they're a team that's on the rise for sure.
Yeah, that'll be an achievement to crack the top 100, and a couple of good games here, and they might do that. Well, we've looked at their performances against other teams through all the others, and in general, they have never beaten any of the other teams. But the fact is, they haven't played them that much either. In fact, in the case of Australia, they've never met. So they played Japan 3 times and China 6 times, and they all resulted in losses. But I don't think that historical record matters so much here, because I think Vietnam is kind of relying on a new and stronger team.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, to get some points out of this. So let's move into part 3. And maybe you've discussed all the rankings individually, but it's always interesting to kind of see them all in one group. So let's compare them.
Right. So first is Japan. They're 24th in FIFA, 29th in ELO. Next is Australia at 35th and 36th. So a few points behind Japan, but pretty close. There's a bit of a drop off then to Saudi Arabia. They're 61st in FIFA, 59th in ELO. Then you get China, who are 71st and 78th, closely followed by Oman, who are 79th and 80th. Then, as you mentioned, Vietnam, 92nd and 101st in the rankings, so a little bit further behind. So those rankings are consistent still with each team's pot they were put in for the group.
That's right. Okay, yes. And do you think you can kind of quickly summarize the head-to-head, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah, I'll quickly summarize it. So Japan has a winning record against all the other 5 teams in the group. Australia has a winning record against all the other teams, though, except for China, who they have a 1-1-1 record with. China actually has a better kind of head-to-head record than Saudi Arabia. Again, an even record with Japan, and then China getting the better of Saudi Arabia on the head-to-head record. Saudi Arabia only besting Oman and Vietnam in this group. And then moving on to Oman and Vietnam, the bottom 2 teams, while they haven't met much, but Oman is a team with a winning record.
Okay, great. Now a bit of discussion about how things shape up. Let me begin by asking you, do you see things going differently according to the pots there, or do you see room for movement?
I see a little bit of room for movement, perhaps not tons. But I think, the team I am excited about is Vietnam. They are, by every ranking system and every head-to-head record, the weakest team in the group. But they're a very different team than they have been historically. A younger team, a more exciting team, and a team on the rise. So I actually think that even though they've never been at this level before, I actually think they can be competitive with Oman and China, and not necessarily will they finish last in the group.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so far they've been kind of better in performance than they have in results. And the results, I guess, apart from the previous round of qualifying here, the results kind of look the same as ever. But all the Vietnamese know that it's a much stronger team than they put forward before. And I'm kind of excited to see them maybe take advantage. Well, they already No, it's not them that has, but I'm excited to see them steal a few points. I think that's as much as they can expect. Maybe fifth place if they do well, but I think success will be measured more at the individual game level in stealing a few points from other teams. Do you see Oman doing that?
I certainly see Oman doing that. I mean, of course, they've got the win in Japan already. I think they're capable. Yeah, I see them, Oman and Vietnam, probably being the bottom two. Um, and yeah, maybe Vietnam I would favor just a little bit. Um, in general, in this group, though, I do see kind of a line between the top three and the bottom three. Japan, Australia, and Saudi Arabia, I think, will be kind of the only teams fighting for that top three positions. China, Oman, Vietnam, I see being the bottom three, and there could be some change in the order in that top three and bottom three, but I don't see kind of teams crossing above or below that line.
I agree with you there. I think China is more likely to struggle with the teams below them than to challenge the teams above them. We have seen Saudi Arabia kind of lapse in a way that would, might put them below that gulf, but that doesn't seem to be the case this time. And I think they'll be interested in proving themselves an Asian giant again. I'm not sure they'll be strong enough to overcome Japan. But actually, when I look at Australia's squad, I'm a bit surprised by their consistency. We've kind of noted that they are actually more consistent in this qualification than they've been in other ones. When I look at their squad, I kind of feel like this is the weakest squad I've seen in a while from Australia, from my perspective. How about you?
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. Some veterans have retired. Of course, Saudi Arabia finished ahead of Australia at the exact same stage 4 years ago. So I think that's kind of an interesting subplot. And to be honest, with Saudi Arabia, Hervé Renard is a manager that gets the best out of his teams, no matter who he's with. So I think that's kind of a bit of a wild card. I'm sure Saudi Arabia were quite aggressive to go after him, but that kind of gives Saudi Arabia perhaps a bit of an X factor, and may be able to take advantage, of any Australian slip ups.
Yeah, do you think it'll make them challengers to Japan, especially now that Japan has lost a game?
I don't think so. I think Japan will assert themselves in this group, and I maybe favor Australia over Saudi Arabia still, just because I feel Japan and Australia have a bit of a rivalry, and Australia are probably more capable of getting points off Japan than Saudi Arabia is. But it could be close for sure.
Yeah, I do think Japan is not unassailable. Well, of course, I felt this way before the first round of games, and of course, the loss at home to Oman was shocking. I think that'll maybe actually motivate them to be a bit more careful. It might be that they took that game for granted a little bit. In the long run, it might kind of strengthen them. But they and South Korea have both become a bit less consistent than they used to be. So I do think a few points could be grabbed off China, and I think those kind of points will be what decides things in the end, not necessarily their performances against big teams, but how many points they drop to the respectable teams below.
Yeah, and to that point, Japan, I guess, a bit of a disadvantage already with that home loss to Oman.
Yeah, but as I say, I think that'll make them a bit more careful. We saw they played Vietnam in the Asian Cup and only won 1-0 on a penalty, so they should be a bit kind of immunized against these teams that maybe in the past they've taken for granted.
Yeah.
What about China, though?
Yeah, China's a bit of a hard team to place. You just think it's got to be a matter of time before they put it all together. But I don't think they're there yet. I think they're kind of unlucky to be grouped with with three strong teams, they might have had a bit more of a shot at third place had they been in Group A, potentially. But I think we've seen in their recent results that they can be good against smaller teams, but they struggle when they come up against better opposition. So I think that pattern will hold here.
Yeah, there's really nothing, no indications that they're ready to challenge at the top level, except for the fact that they're the biggest team in the whole region and should be doing a lot better. And as you said, you kind of waiting for the year where they justify that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've had enough of your kind of beating around the bush here, Connor. Give it to me straight. What's the order of this group going to be?
I think Japan will recover and finish first. I think they've got the best squad, and they've got a lot of experience at this level. So I think Japan will finish first. I'm going to say Australia second and Saudi Arabia third, though it's not out of the question that Saudi Arabia could finish higher than that. Then I'm going to say China fourth, and I'm going to say Vietnam fifth and Oman sixth. I know Oman got a good result already, but I see Vietnam much closer than kind of the 20 place gap between in the rankings between Oman and Vietnam. So maybe I'm a bit optimistic, but I'm going to say Vietnam fifth and Oman sixth.
All right, that's pretty interesting. I'm with you in two areas, in the top three and the bottom three. I think that's a bit of a big divide there. And I agree with you also that Japan will overcome that loss to Oman and finish first. But I'm going to pip Saudi Arabia for second. As consistent as Australia have been, the squad seems almost like if we put them in the Premier League, I wouldn't see any Premier League players in that squad except maybe for the goalkeeper.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to pip Saudi Arabia to finish second under the spell of Hervé Renard and his dashing clothes.
Of course, Saudi Arabia don't have Premier League level players, but you still think they can pull ahead of Australia?
You're right. I mean, probably I'm not as familiar with the Saudi Arabian players. But I just have the feeling that they're going to perform a little bit better than Australia.
Yeah.
We saw last time they actually were bested by Australia, but they won on more consistency, and I think that could be the case this time too. I'm also just trying to differentiate myself a bit from your prediction.
Of course.
So on that one, I'm going to go bold on the bottom half, and I'm going to say Oman finishes ahead of China, and then China finishes fifth, and Vietnam will put in, as they've been doing so far, will put in good performances, but not necessarily get the results that those performances deserve. But I do think they will end up with about 5 points or so.
Yeah.
And again, that's kind of to try to differentiate myself from you a little there.
Yeah. Well, two relative unknowns in Oman and Vietnam. They're newcomers and they haven't competed at this level often, so difficult to say how they'll do. But I'm glad we're not the same. We can see how things play out over the coming months.
Yeah, I should justify that a little bit more. Like, I've watched Oman in the Asian Cup and stuff. I'm pretty impressed with the way they play. They really deserve much better in the Asian Cup. So I'm kind of pulling for them to do a little bit better here. But it's often that those, really hard performing teams they get scored on in the 90th minute,
Yeah.
and don't get the result that they seem to deserve. Anyway, great talking to you about this, Connor. Is there anything you have to add?
No, looking forward to it. I'm definitely feeling more prepared to follow the Asian Games after this, and I hope our listeners are as well. And yeah, looking forward to the matches, which pick up in October, just a couple weeks from now.
You bet. Well, I'm looking forward to it too, and thanks for talking through this with me.
Yeah, see you next time.
Next time. Bye-bye.